was a quiet evening, the kind that passes without notice. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. Inside a modest apartment, a phone buzzed, then went silent. No one realized it at the time, but that moment would become the last trace of Jade Alvarez. By morning, she was gone. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a life that seemed to vanish, without explanation. And as investigators would soon discover, the truth behind her disappearance was far more unsettling than anyone could have imagined. On the morning of April 12th, Jade Alvarez failed to show up for work. It was unusual. At 24 years old, Jade was known for her discipline. She rarely missed a shift. She answered messages quickly. She stayed connected. When her coworkers called, there was no response. Hours passed. Concern grew. Later that day, Jade's younger sister stopped by her apartment. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal. Her bag was on the chair. Her shoes were by the door. Her phone was missing. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken items. No noise complaints from neighbors. Just silence. Police were contacted that evening. What initially appeared to be a simple missing person case would soon take a darker turn. Officers arrived at the apartment shortly after 6:30 p.m. They conducted a preliminary search. Nothing immediately stood out. No signs of forced entry suggested Jade likely knew whoever had last seen her. That detail changed everything. Detectives began building a timeline. The last confirmed sighting of Jade was the previous night at approximately 8:15 p.m. She had returned home after meeting a friend. At 9:02 p.m., her phone sent a final message. "I'm home. Talk tomorrow." That was the last known communication. Surveillance cameras in the building showed Jade entering, but never leaving. As the investigation continued, that detail became critical. If Jade didn't leave, then someone else must have come in. Days later, forensic teams conducted a deeper analysis of the apartment. They examined fingerprints, surfaces, and entry points. The results were subtle, but significant. There were unidentified fingerprints on the kitchen counter. Not smudged, not old, fresh. Investigators also found a faint trace of disturbed fabric on the couch. Something, or someone, had been there recently. Then came another development. Security footage from a nearby street camera revealed a vehicle parked outside Jade's building around 9:30 p.m. The car remained there for approximately 20 minutes. Its license plate was partially visible. That fragment became a key lead. As detectives worked through Jade's contacts, one name surfaced repeatedly: Daniel Reyes, a 27-year-old acquaintance. They had met a few months earlier through mutual friends. According to witnesses, Daniel had recently shown increased interest in Jade. But Jade did not feel the same. Friends described their interactions as uncomfortable. Messages recovered from Jade's social media revealed something more concerning. Repeated attempts from Daniel to contact her, unanswered messages, missed calls, and one message sent just 2 days before her disappearance. "Why are you ignoring me?" As investigators compared timelines, another detail emerged. Daniel owned a vehicle similar to the one seen in the surveillance footage. Detectives brought Daniel in for questioning. He appeared calm, cooperative. He told investigators he had not seen Jade in over a week. He claimed he was home alone the night she disappeared. No witnesses, no alibi. When asked about the messages, he downplayed them, said he was just trying to talk. But inconsistencies began to appear. His phone records showed activity near Jade's apartment that night, not far away, not hours later. Right there, at the exact time she went missing. The investigation intensified. Officers obtained a warrant to search Daniel's vehicle. Inside, they found something small, but important. A strand of hair. It was sent for forensic testing. Days later, results confirmed it matched Jade. With mounting evidence, investigators returned to Daniel. This time, the questioning was different, more direct, more focused. They presented the timeline, the footage, the forensic match. Daniel's story began to shift. At first, he admitted he had driven past Jade's apartment. Then he admitted he had gone inside. But he insisted nothing happened. He claimed Jade was fine when he left. However, new evidence contradicted that claim. Digital forensics revealed Jade's phone had briefly connected to a tower miles away later that night, in a remote area outside the city. That location became the next focus. Search teams were deployed. Hours turned into days. Then the devastating discovery was made. Jade's belongings were found near an isolated roadside. Not scattered, not abandoned randomly. Placed deliberately. It suggested intent, control, and a truth that was becoming harder to ignore. On April 21st, Daniel Reyes was taken into custody. The charges were serious. During interrogation, his account continued to change. Eventually, under pressure from the evidence, he admitted to being with Jade that night. He described an argument, a confrontation that escalated. But even then, his statements were incomplete. Investigators relied on evidence to fill the gaps. Forensic data, location tracking, witness timelines. Piece by piece, the sequence of events became clear. What began as an unwanted visit had ended in tragedy. Daniel was formally charged. The case moved to court months later. The evidence was presented, the timeline reconstructed. And in the end, the jury reached a verdict. Guilty. Jade Alvarez's story left a lasting impact. Her family described her as kind, focused, and full of plans for the future. Plans that would never be realized. The case also highlighted warning signs that often go unnoticed. Unwanted attention, persistent contact, escalating behavior. What may seem small at first can sometimes lead to something far more serious. In the months following the trial, local communities began discussing safety more openly. Awareness campaigns were introduced. Conversations changed. But for Jade's family, the loss remained. A quiet absence that could never be filled. Her story became more than a case file. It became a reminder of how quickly normal life can shift, of how important it is to take concerns seriously, and of the lasting consequences when those warnings are ignored. And even now, as time moves forward, one question still lingers in the silence. Could this have been prevented? It began like any ordinary morning. A quiet neighborhood, a family home, a life that, from the outside, appeared stable, even happy. But behind closed doors, something had already gone terribly wrong. When Rachel O'Reilly failed to answer her phone, concern slowly turned into fear. By the time authorities arrived, What they found inside that home would raise more questions than answers. At first, it looked like a tragedy. Then, it became something far more complex. Because the deeper investigators looked, the clearer it became. This was not just a case of loss. It was a carefully constructed story, hiding a devastating truth. On the morning of October 4th, Rachel O'Reilly was reported missing. She was a young mother, a wife, known for her warmth and dedication to her family. When she didn't respond to calls or messages, her absence was immediately noticed. Later that day, concern escalated when her husband reported that Rachel had not been seen since the previous evening. According to him, she had been at home. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But as hours passed, the silence became more unsettling. Police were contacted. Officers arrived at the family home. At first glance, everything appeared normal. No signs of forced entry, no visible disturbance. But something felt off. Rachel was nowhere to be found, and there was no clear explanation for her sudden disappearance. Detectives began by establishing a timeline. On the evening before she disappeared, Rachel had been at home with her family. There were no reports of visitors, no known plans to leave. Her phone activity suggested she had been using it normally, until it suddenly stopped. That detail raised immediate concern. Phones rarely go silent without reason. Investigators spoke with family members and neighbors. No one reported hearing anything unusual. No arguments, no disturbances. Yet Rachel was gone. As the investigation continued, officers took a closer look inside the home. It was then that subtle details began to emerge. Forensic teams conducted a detailed examination of the house. They documented every surface, every room, every possible clue. At first, the findings were minimal. But then, something stood out. In one area of the home, investigators detected signs of recent cleaning. Not routine cleaning, targeted cleaning. Specific spots appeared to have been wiped more thoroughly than others. This raised immediate suspicion. Why clean so carefully in just one area? Further testing revealed faint traces of biological evidence, not visible to the naked eye, but present. That discovery changed the direction of the case. This was no longer just a missing person investigation. It was potentially something far more serious. As investigators reviewed Rachel's personal life, attention naturally turned to those closest to her. Her husband became a central figure in the investigation, not because of immediate evidence, but because of proximity. He was the last person known to have seen her. During initial interviews, he appeared cooperative, calm, composed. He stated that Rachel had been home the night before. He claimed he went to bed, and when he woke up, she was gone. But as detectives compared his statements with the timeline, inconsistencies began to appear. Small at first, then more noticeable. Details didn't quite align. Times shifted. Descriptions changed. Nothing definitive, but enough to raise questions. As the investigation intensified, detectives began digging deeper into the couple's relationship. Friends and acquaintances were interviewed. What they revealed painted a more complicated picture. Behind the appearance of a stable marriage, there had been tension, arguments, struggles. Nothing that immediately suggested violence, but enough to indicate that things were not as perfect as they seemed. Meanwhile, forensic analysis continued. The traces found in the home were examined more closely. Experts worked to determine their origin and significance. At the same time, investigators analyzed phone records, digital activity, and movement patterns. They searched for any indication of Rachel leaving voluntarily, but none appeared. There were no signs she had packed belongings, no financial activity, no communication suggesting she intended to leave. The possibility that she had simply disappeared on her own became increasingly unlikely. Attention returned to the home and to the person who had been there with her. Days later, a critical breakthrough emerged. Forensic evidence confirmed that the traces found in the home were significant. They indicated that something had occurred inside that space, something that had been partially concealed. At the same time, inconsistencies in the husband's account became more pronounced. Investigators re-interviewed him. They presented the evidence, the timeline, the forensic findings. His responses began to shift. Subtle changes in language, hesitation where there had once been certainty. Then came another development. Investigators discovered additional evidence linking activity within the home to the time frame of Rachel's disappearance. This evidence contradicted earlier statements. The gap between the story and the facts was growing wider. The investigation reached a turning point. What had once been uncertain was now becoming clearer. On the basis of the accumulating evidence, authorities moved forward. Rachel's husband was arrested. The charges reflected the seriousness of the findings. During questioning, he continued to deny responsibility. But the evidence told a different story. Forensic analysis, timeline reconstruction, witness statements. Together, they formed a consistent narrative. A narrative that placed him at the center of the events that had taken place inside the home. The case proceeded to trial. In court, the prosecution carefully laid out the sequence of events. They demonstrated how the evidence pointed to a single conclusion. The defense challenged the interpretation, raised doubts, questioned the findings, but the weight of the evidence remained. After deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty. The case of Rachel O'Reilly left a lasting impact on everyone involved. Her family mourned the loss of a daughter, a mother, and a loved one. A life taken far too soon. The case also highlighted the complexity of domestic situations, how appearances can differ from reality, how signs of deeper issues may remain hidden until it is too late. For investigators, it was a reminder of the importance of detail, of looking beyond the surface, of following the evidence, even when it leads to uncomfortable truths. In the years that followed, Rachel's story continued to resonate. It became a symbol of the need for awareness, for understanding, for recognizing that not all danger comes from the outside. Sometimes, it exists much closer to home. And in the quiet that followed, one truth remained undeniable. The answers had been there all along, hidden in plain sight.